Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Welcome back to all the old viewers. Welcome to all the new viewers. Really excited to have you here today. As always, please send your comments in the comment box. Wave hello. We're really excited to have you joining us. And any questions that you have for our guests, please put in the comment box in the questions. We will try our best to get through to all of your questions. A lot of times during our conversation, we will cover a lot of these topics, so hopefully your questions get answered. But we love hearing from you. Hi, Tom. Hi, Maha. Hi, Mohammed. Hi, Maura. Just keep waving hello. I love acknowledging everybody that's joining us. I'm really excited to have an amazing guest with us today. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is Dr. Uzma Syed. I'm an infectious disease physician in New York. And I talk about, ID a lot, obviously, because of the current COVID pandemic that we're in. But I also have a lot of other, passion projects that I talk about frequently: youth mentorship, interfaith initiatives, humanitarian efforts. So a lot of different things that, I talk about frequently. Right now, we are continuing our conversation about color, which is a much needed forum. I'm happy to bring, really diverse people to you so that you can hear from them, hear about their journeys, hear their stories, and really learn from it and take something away. So I hope that there's really something there for everyone. And I'm really excited to have Amaka joining us today. So let me go ahead and invite her to this conversation. Hi, Ali. Hi,
Hi,
how are
I'm
you?
really good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So happy to meet face to face and connect finally. I know we've been messaging back and forth and emailing and chatting, but it's nice to, this is the most connection that we're going to have virtually, until the pandemic is sort of, out of the way.
Exactly. No, I actually don't mind the remote telehealth thing going. It's been a way to the stress for sure.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, Amaka, I want to get started by introducing you a little bit formally to our audience. So, I'm really excited that you're here today. For people that have been watching this series, I've been trying to bring in a lot of diverse people from diverse backgrounds, diverse industries, so we can really hear stories, from all different industries, all different walks of life. It's really about amplifying Black voices. But I really, I've had many physicians on, as you know, but I really was very, very passionate about bringing on a medical student. We really need to hear the perspective, the student perspective. And so I'm really excited that you're here today. So let me tell everybody about you. You are a first generation Nigerian immigrant, currently a first year medical student at Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. Your interest in medicine peaked after experiencing the inadequate management of acute diseases in rural areas in the United States, in Dominica, and in your home country of Nigeria. Amaka is enthusiastic about using her platform to shine a light on the discrepancies in healthcare. So once again, welcome, Amaka. I'm really excited that you're here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Of
And
course.
Dr. Smith, yeah, I was really
So,
happy you reached out.
oh, of course. And, and welcome to Twitter, by the way. I saw that you just recently joined Twitter. So
Everyone
another,
talks about Med Twitter, and I had to figure out
absolutely.
what's Med Twitter and what's going on
Yeah,
there.
it's a whole new world, let me tell you. So it's really interesting because the social media platforms are very diverse and they each bring something different. Instagram is very unique. Medical community also is very involved in Instagram as well, but in a different way. And Med Twitter is just a whole other level. So you'll see now that you're there. So we heard a little bit about you, but I want to start off. I want everyone to really hear a little bit more about you from your perspective. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself? Tell us specifically about when you moved from Nigeria, and a little bit about that transition and what it was like.
Well, I this is basically my med school interview all over again. I moved to the States 8 years ago. I It wasn't basically me leaving Nigeria and moving to the States. I always knew I wanted to do medicine, but obviously I was young. I didn't know the path to go. So after I graduated high school in Nigeria, I decided to go to a pre-med program in Dominica, which is why I mentioned that in my bio. And I did a 1 year pre-med program there and then decided, I don't know, that I wanted something. I just knew I wanted something in a larger world scale. So
Mm-hmm.
I applied to a bunch of schools here in the US and I chose the school I thought was the best fit for me with my biology degree. So I went to SUNY Geneseo in upstate New York. I got my BSc in biology. I love my school, really proud to be there.
Wow.
And I graduated in 2015. And after that, so I don't know if people know this, but international students are given a year to 3 years work permit to work in the US.
Yeah.
So I wanted to use every opportunity I got. So I applied for the 3 year work permit and I got it, thankfully, and worked as a lab tech for 3 years and
Oh,
decided,
wow.
yeah. But it was a good way, actually, because when I came to the US, I came with no one. All my family's
Mm.
back home. I was the only one
Wow.
who immigrated to the US. I was 16 at the time when I came here as a first year, as a
Oh my
freshman in
goodness.
college.
Wow.
Everyone around me was older because people start college here at 18, 19. So I
Right.
started really young and I was kind of nervous. So after I graduated college at 20. I just thought I didn't want to use that young mindset to go into med school. So I definitely worked for 3 years, which I'm grateful for. I learned so much about the US health system within that 3 years. And
Wow.
also they always tell you it's always challenging. Like med school, just getting into med school in the US is so hard. And when
Yeah.
you're not from the US, it's even harder. I would say 80% of medical schools don't accept non-Americans into their school. So that was another anxiety, like with my application process going
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
But I knew what I brought to the table. So I was like, you know what? If any school sees what bring to the table, they're going to take me. And it did. So here I am.
That's
I chose
amazing.
Geisel. Yeah, it's been good.
Amazing. What an amazing story. Wow. There is so much that you just mentioned that I want to talk about and
There's
unpack a
so
little
much,
bit.
so much.
So much. I don't know if we have enough time to get through. I feel like I need to bring you back for another episode too. But that's just incredible. So you moved here alone, essentially. That in itself is a huge challenge. Let's go back a little bit. Talk to me about your childhood in Nigeria. Are you from a big family, a small family? Talk to me about what your day to day was like, and then when you decided to move here, I can only imagine how difficult that must have been to essentially move here at such an impressionable age, all alone, and to take on this huge task.
I love my family to death. They're my strength. They're the reason I do this every day.
Oh,
I come from a big family in a sense, but it's mom and
yeah.
dad and five other siblings.
Wow.
I have four sisters and my one brother. I'm the oldest elder girl.
Got it.
So I have all my little ones following my footsteps. So
Yeah.
my inspiration comes from like showing them that we can all do this, and honestly showing everyone we can all do this. I love to speak about I'm super proud to be a Black woman, especially in this day and age when people want to make you feel like, oh, you shouldn't mention that. Like, no, I'm super proud of it, but I'm
Yeah.
also proud to be a woman in this field in general, just like
Yeah.
I'm doing it. And I love to talk about my story to tell everyone if I'm doing it, everyone
Yeah.
can do it.
Yeah, no, it's so important to really be vocal, because there's so many young girls out there that would follow in your footsteps, and they need to hear from you that the success stories is what people need to hear. So, were there any specific influences while you were growing up that, steered you in the direction of medicine? Your parents, was anybody immediate in your immediate family in the medical field, or friends, or, any influences that you can think of that, you were like, oh, this is the field for me?
I would, that question is a really good question because one thing that surprised me coming into med school was how many of my colleagues had an influence growing up,
Mm-hmm.
like parents or
Yep.
someone in your proximity. I had none of that.
Wow.
Um, I, the first person in my family ever to be on this journey to
Wow.
medicine. So I just always wanted to be a doctor. I cannot, and for
Amazing.
some reason, like I would give my parents all the props in the world because I grew up thinking whatever you want to be, done. And that's the same mindset I had. Like I never even thought, oh, I needed to see someone who looked like me, or I
Yep.
needed to know someone who looked like me to be able to do this. I just, once it was stuck in my head, I wanted to do medicine. I knew it was going to get done.
That's amazing. So it's really that confidence that you had that carried you through this, which is phenomenal. And obviously, being the eldest sibling, you probably, and the first one to leave the house, correct? You were the first one to go away
My
and.
my brother was the first one to go away, but
Mhm.
he's in engineering. My dad's in
Okay.
engineering, so all of that
Okay.
went towards that engineering aspect. And I was like, yeah, no, no physics, none of that like
Oh.
related to me at all. No,
The sciences, it was all about the sciences for
it
you.
was all
So
about
when you came to the US, I mean, there's so many different things that are happening in your life at one particular time. The transition from, first of all, a different country, different continent, cultural changes, educational changes. The educational system is very different, as you're aware. And all of these, and then leaving your family, coming, I mean, you're dealing with so many things all at once. Tell us a little bit about, how was that transition? I mean, obviously, I'm assuming, you must have been homesick. It was not easy. But what kind of challenges did you have along the way?
I would whenever I reflect back at my journey in my life, I feel like I'm always reflecting back with like such gratitude because I could not have been in the best position when I immigrated here. I
Mhm.
immigrated into a college, not
Yep.
coming in here with nothing to latch onto. So I would
Right.
say, very grateful for that. Actually, having a whole system and office
Yep.
built for me. The hardest thing was, and I still deal with that till this day,
Mhm.
is proving myself to my colleagues and professors and people in the field I want to go into. Just proving that, I'm this 5 foot woman coming in here, but I want you to listen to me, without me being aggressive about it. Just finding that balance and like picture a 16-year-old girl trying to do that
Yeah.
without any tools to do it and with no one on her side to do it with. So that was my challenge coming in because the one story I would go back to when I first came here, I transferred in and someone who was meant to guide me, my mentor told me I should probably take easier classes to ease myself in because no one was sure how much English I spoke and how much I was going to get it and assimilate. It's really like learning about the culture at that time. And I would characterize myself as I was legitimately fighting to be recognized because I
Wow.
grew up in a place where when I was in high school, like everyone just automatically was like, "Oh yeah, Maka, she's this smart girl. She's going to do well. She's going to do that."
Yeah.
And I come into a new system, and now I have to prove myself, something I've never done before. So that was very challenging to me because I'm like, why do I have to prove myself? Look at me. I don't have
Yeah.
to prove myself. This is something I've always done. So that was very challenging because I literally remember sitting across from him and he was looking at my transcript and looking at the classes I was going to take that semester. And he was telling me to drop all those classes.
Wow.
genetics, all my bio classes, and I should start with easy like classes to see how I did. And I literally just told him, I'm not going to do that. Just give me a chance, see what happens. Now thinking back, there was no way he could have forced me to do it, but I didn't know. He couldn't force
Of
me to
course.
drop those classes. It was just like an
Right.
advice. But I remember thinking I have to show him. And at the end of that semester, when I had my 4.0, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to match on to him. I just transferred. I transferred my mentor and chose another person because,
Amazing.
and that's like a story. I help mentor some of the high schoolers around me, and I keep telling people, you can't you can't make people see your worth. And I feel like trying is only going to harm you. So instead of me going back and showing him my 4.0, I just, my mental health was important to me and I wanted someone who believed in me. So I simply just transferred, and that's the way I live my life right now.
Wow. There's so many amazing, points in that, what you just said. There's so many great takeaways in that I want to just highlight a couple of important things that,
Yeah.
essentially what the story, that the message that you're saying is that, you are your best advocate, right? And so you had to, at a very young age, and you're transitioning now into a different country, into a different educational system, and essentially relying on those people that are in leadership positions to help guide you, whether it be a mentor, an advisor, and putting your faith in them. So at that very impressionable time, it was really important that you knew, your worth and, your capabilities, because it was very easy to sort of be swayed into, okay, let me downplay myself a little bit, or maybe or get into that notion of doubting yourself. And had it not been for someone like you who was, really very aware of, your potential, and, somebody else could have, and personally sounds like you were very much an advocate for yourself. And, if somebody else who was not as vocal was in your situation, the outcome may have been very different. So it's really interesting to hear that. And it's really interesting to see the steps that you took. First of all, standing up for yourself and completing your tasks that you had, planned for yourself, and then aligning yourself with somebody that, could provide you the support that you needed. And I think that is really a great point for anybody listening, at any point in your life. I think that's a really important message to have, is that if you find that somebody's holding you back, you need to find somebody that's going to help you soar. So that's a beautiful, beautiful message there, beautiful story, and really shows your resilience. So now you switched, your mentors, your advisor, and now you're continuing with, your bio classes, continuing towards, your pre-med essentially. When you decided you're going to apply to medical school, so you have the MCATs, you have the core classes that you have to take, and now you have to file your applications. Tell us a little bit about that process. Was it, again, more hurdles coming up where you were being told maybe you shouldn't apply to too many places, or maybe limit yourself to certain areas, or, what kind of challenges came along that process?
I applied to med school. I feel like even before the application is sent is such a mental hurdle,
Mhm.
because before you even take your MCAT and write down everything on your application, you've already heard chatters about, on forums about, okay, there are not that many Black students on it, not that many international students on it. So you're already having those self doubts. My major hurdle was personally financial. Like, I had more of a financial hurdle than any other
Mhm.
hurdle, because
Mhm.
I don't know if you would know this, but I really think the system which is why I'm really passionate about this. There's so many
Yeah.
instances where we scream diversity, but there's so many places where so many people can fall through the cracks because there's not that many leeways for them. Just to send one secondary to a school is $100. One
Yeah.
secondary is $100. One primary. So if people are listening, like, your primary application is the first thing you send out, and then secondary applications are things you send to individual schools. Primaries are $35 each. and then secondaries are $100 each. And then when you're like me, an international student, where you have limited choices, so you want to apply to the broadest amount of schools, you have to save $4,000, and then you have to fly to those places and interview in those places,
Right.
and pay for hotels, pay for cabs, and except you're someone who knows this is the one school you're going to, you only apply to one school, then that may be cheap for you. But I sent out, I believe, 20 applications, and I went to 16 interviews. And
Wow.
yeah, so that was my biggest hurdle. I just remember every time I was like putting in that like credit card information, like crying inside.
Yeah.
But it paid off at the end of the day, because applying to a broad set of school would mean more scholarship opportunities for you if you get accepted into, every school I interviewed at accepted me, which was like, I remember
Amazing.
after getting my first acceptance, I was like, oh my God, I'm definitely going to be a doctor. And my parents were really happy. And then back to back to back, I kept hearing back from them. And I just remember thinking, this is amazing. But it just gives you like a broader chance to advocate for yourself when a scholarship comes. Because I remember getting like a scholarship from like other schools, and I'm like, hey, this school gave me this much money. Can you match this and match that? And just thinking back to my application process, the two biggest things which I'm hoping I become more involved in with the pre-med application process was I couldn't find someone to help me tell my story. So if you ask anyone who applied to med school, they'll tell you you should get someone to read your personal statement. You should get someone to talk to you about what your application should look like. I did that. And I went to this company that helps students, and I got, like I'm trying to make this as, I got someone who knew nothing about my story and didn't relate to me. And you could see it when she reviewed my application. She was this brilliant medical student at Stanford, just brilliant. But because she had no connection to my struggle, when she read my application, her feedback wasn't what I wanted. And like you said, advocate for yourself. That's like a major theme going on around my journey. I had to go back and tell them I'm not happy with her edit and her suggestions, and I want someone who is closer to my experience. And then I got a Nigerian medical student at Yale
Wow.
come back and read my application, and I was blown away by his suggestions. Not because I'm both levels of intellect, right? The only difference was how much did one relate to me. So
Yep.
when people say like, oh yeah, there's diversity in thought, that's always, it's easier said than done. Yes, there's diversity in thought. Like, I may be interested in this part of medicine and that part of medicine. There is diversity in that, which is something
Yep.
we all appreciate. But there is something to be said about diversity in experiences and culture too, and community, because you get a sense of comfort and just a sense of that person knows what I'm talking about without me over explaining what I'm trying to say to them. And that was the most clear example I could ever have experienced, having basically Stanford, yeah, amazing med students, right?
Yep. Yep.
And just how they approached my experience on paper was completely different. And I just remember thinking, I want to be that person for other incoming medical students too. Maybe if they see my face, maybe if they talk to me, maybe they might be like, hey, I really like what you have to say. Maybe I should listen to you. Just maybe.
Right. I mean,
But
that in itself, again, so many amazing points to highlight in the story that you just shared. I think the relatability of that experience just speaks volumes because, we talk so much about diversity and inclusion, this day and age, and we talk a lot about mentorship. And as you mentioned, intellect is one thing, but there's something to be said about personal connection. So it's very, very different. And it's, something, a learning point actually for that company that you actually hired, who you, paid services for them to actually go back and evaluate that. I'm amazed to hear, I'm so happy to hear that they did have another student to offer you the services from a Nigerian student, but there should have been some foresight into that to begin with, so obviously that part of the puzzle, because everybody sort of thinks that, everyone's uniform. A medical student is a medical student is a medical student applying to med school. Not the case at all. Clear-cut example is you're bringing something very personal, your personal statement, and you want your voice to be heard. You want your story to resonate. And how can somebody, get that message across that can't relate to and most of the things that you're saying? So I think that point is so poignant, and I think that's something that a lot of institutions now need to take a step back and look at that, whether it be businesses, universities. There's a huge movement for diversity, inclusion, this and that. But I think it's more, more action than words. You have to look at, what does that really mean, and how do you apply that? So I think that's an amazing point that you just highlighted there. And going back a step further, when you were talking a little bit about, the lack of support, when you were applying to these schools and everything like that, did you have, the struggle, obviously was there, everybody has, these financial, anxiety, applying to school. College tuitions are, out of this world, medical school tuitions are out of this world. I don't have to tell you that. And the application process, everything costs so much money. So students in general have so much anxiety to begin with. And, I'm so happy to hear that you were able to get through that process. But did you have friends that were in the same situation as you, that did not have that luxury, that were not as fortunate, that were not able to apply to a handful of schools? And in the end, may have affected even the consequences in their future. Maybe they didn't match, get into a medical school. Did you find that you were, having colleagues that were, struggling, that, were not having the opportunities because simply for the fact, maybe not just financially, but that the support system is not there, in the sense, as you mentioned, that the system is really broken. There aren't, people don't know where the resources are. People don't know where the aid is. They don't know about, how to waive an application fee, who, can apply for that and who meets certain criteria. So essentially the right, advisors are not in place to bring the right resources to the right, the students that may need them.
Yeah. I just thinking back, even in college, a bunch of us started as pre-meds. And when I think back, now that most of us are in med school now, the most amount of people who got sidetracked in our journey towards medicine were more people of color, because coming to college already was like such a hurdle. In my school, we had programs to help communities that are normally, to incentivize people to come to college. And then now we're in college, I don't want to generalize every college, but from the stories I've heard from friends I know, a bunch of people just think, you're in college now, everyone has the same playing field, we all have the same resources, you should pull yourself by the bootstraps and get to where you need to go, which isn't what happens, right? Because you have people who did AP bio and AP that, and you have people who never even took those courses, and you want them to be on the same level. So I saw a lot of my friends of color drop out of the pre-med journey. Some of them dropped out because of their advisors telling them they can't do it. Wow. If every single person starts to write out this professor told me I couldn't make it, it would be, I had a 3.98 GPA and I had professors tell me I couldn't do it.
Wow. Unbelievable. For
no reason other than I wasn't American. So there's always a reason someone tells you you're not going to make it. Me not being American, maybe a score, maybe you have a mental health issue you have to deal with, maybe you have financial issues you have to deal with. There's always a reason people would tell you can't do it. So I did see people do that. Financially, I feel like most Americans do know that there's an aid process going. So if you are American, I believe the AAMC gives you a few applications free. But the caveat is it's only for Americans, so people who are dreamers, so DACA, don't get those. People who are international don't get those, you know?
Right.
So there is like that like stipulation, like, okay, yeah, we're going to give it to Americans. And then the only minorities who know of these resources are the ones who actually go through all that hurdle and reach the point where they have to apply.
Right.
No one is telling people like their freshman year, their senior year, you know, most students are already having the anxiety when they come into college, even when you're in high school. So they're already having those anxieties and dropping out because you're thinking, you know what, by the time I get there, I probably won't be able to make it. Instead of the AAMC and organizations to reach out and get high schoolers and college students when during their infancy, to know that these resources are possible, they wait till like, you know, you're finally ready to apply and they're like, hey, do you know we can give you like 15 application free? Which the way we approach diversity, the foundation of it needs to, if we keep building on that foundation, we're not going to go anywhere. I was having a conversation with a Black physician this morning, and he mentioned that, and I thought it was so profound. But it's true, like why we know the basis of diversity and inclusion, all the offices they have for diversity and inclusion in companies and hospitals and schools, and the basis of it needs to be scattered and redone, because diversity and inclusion isn't just when you get here, we're going to help you. It's like, how do we get you here? And then when you're here, how do we help you?
Yep, exactly.
So that's, I saw a lot of my friends. I wish, I wish I knew what I know now. I would have been such an advocate for them. I was like learning.
But that's the challenge, is that you're learning the ropes yourself and you're trying to navigate for yourself. And especially, you know, on top of that, as an international student who's transferred in and learning the ropes. But as you mentioned, a lot of your classmates, you know, probably never even reached that point because there were so many hurdles along the way. People that were doubting them, you know, hurdles along the way that sort of said, no, you cannot do this for X, Y, and Z reason, which may not have been the case. So absolutely, I agree. I think a lot of effort needs to be made before college. You know, I mean, like you said, the resources, people need to know, there needs to be more work on education and resource allocament, and just for people to know that there are things out there for them. So definitely agree with you there. So tell us a little bit about your medical school interviews. You know, you went to about 16 interviews, you know, seems like you were doing like a tour of the US.
I really did like turn it into like my own personal travel blog. It was such an amazing time. Last year was such an amazing time. I think it was amazing too because my 4 years of college and everything I worked towards was paying off right in front of me. And I was just like in awe, because I'm like talking to my parents back home, and, you know, they worked so hard for me to be here. And just like seeing that come to fulfillment, and everything I wrote in my diary when I was young, like just seeing it happen was a really good time for me. I would say most of my med school interviews were not to call out my current school, but I would say 90% of the interviews, I was interviewed by a person of color.
Okay.
It was something that struck me, and for some reason, I didn't expect it, and to see it happen time and time again. My first interview, I didn't get a person of color, so I was like, okay, you know, this is like normal. And then my second, third, fourth, fifth, I was getting like, you know, Black women, like people who were immigrants, like, and I was like, this is what the foundation of diversity is, because someone who looks like me, a Black physician, isn't coming with any implicit bias. So if she tells me, I don't think you're a good fit for my institution, I would believe her. You know, not that I won't believe any other person, but I think that was like you start bring people, the doubts that would normally be there is taken away by giving
Yeah.
me someone who already relates to me, you know, in some form, some shape. Doesn't have to be a black woman, doesn't have to be a black man. It can be anyone of, you know, someone who
Yep.
just knows that, okay. I was talking to someone in our admissions today, and she
Mm-hmm.
brought up, you know, when they look at an application, you have to look at it broadly. Obviously, I didn't know that when I was applying. Like, just because you have a low score was the full story. So me getting people of color during my interview, I could sense that they could see me. You know, why was your journey this way? Why did you get here this way? You know, when people have lower scores, what happened? Were they working?
Right.
Are they the breadwinners of your family? There's so many things that come into it. When people have
Yep.
verbal scores that are lower, how is their, you know, are they English speakers? So many things that come into it. So it was just like, I was very grateful for that. I I don't think I was, every single person seemed to read my story, and the one thing that resonated with me was everyone was just like very impressed by my application. And like you are right, like everyone, when people who are immigrants, when we tell our stories, it seems like such a powerful thing, where it's like, wow, you went through all this adversity and you came here at 16. And I'm looking at it and I'm just like, it seems like such an everyday normal life to me, because
Yep.
I know hundreds of people whose stories are similar to mine.
Right.
Because, you know, I know a bunch of Nigerians personally who came here, people from Ghana, people from, you know, different countries, Lebanon. Like most of my friends, we
Absolutely.
all,
Yep.
most of my core group of friends are in medicine right now. We literally would pull all-nighters and talk to ourselves, and we were our own sounding boards. So when I go on interviews and people are just like amazed by what I've done, and I'm just like, this is like my life. It's nothing interesting. There's nothing brave about it. There's nothing fascinating about it. This is my normal life, because every single person, even people who are not immigrants, people who are not of color, minorities, everyone has their own story. So
Yep.
like framing, I think like changing that frame from bravery to, you know what, I hear you and this is your story, but this is, you know, thanks for
Yeah.
sharing your story, but it's not bravery, you know.
Yeah. I think it shows, a lot of great character. It shows determination. I think that's what people like to see. Your confidence shines
Exactly.
through and your determination and your work ethic, obviously. So
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Now, on your interviews, two things that I want to talk about. One is, seeing a couple of, in a series of events, you had many interviews where you had people of color, you said, that were interviewing you. Did
Yeah.
you, obviously you felt comfortable and you were happy to see that. Did you find that, that made you view an institution in a particular way where you felt like, okay, this institution now, I'm open to, possibly coming here because they obviously have representation here. They value people, like me. I can see someone like me fitting in here. Were those things that were going through your mind as opposed to a place where you didn't see that diversity?
I I would say I wish that was something that was going through my mind initially, but life comes at you really fast. I In an ideal world for me, I would have loved to have made my decision to go to med school based on how much I felt like they cared about the full me, right? But at the end of the day, like you said, medicine is expensive, tuition is expensive. I had to make the decision between my comfort and, you know, how could I navigate this financially. So I would say when I when I got all those acceptances and I looked at
Yeah.
all my choices, I went with the school that gave me the most money. Shout out to Dartmouth. so so
Which
you
is a
know,
great school.
which is, I love it here. I'm enamored that I'm even here. It's 15-year-old me would never have believed that I would be in this position right now, let me tell you. But
That's
I
amazing.
wish I chose the school, because I wish that I would be in a bigger city where I can like have not just people around me, but when I go in the hospital, the people I'm treating would, you know, look like me, and I can talk to them, and I can go to the high schools, and the students like look like
Yeah.
me, and I'm like talking to them. But in an ideal world, but that wasn't how I approached it. And I think a bunch of us have to make decisions like that in our everyday lives, not just with the schools we go to, with the jobs we take.
Yeah.
And I think I've come to that a conclusion that as much as we can talk about America, the one thing me as an immigrant can say is the American dream is kind of there. It, for me was because I'm still at that point where I believe that, you know what, if I just really grind and really work hard right now in med school, I
Yeah.
can be in a position where I can choose what residency I go into based on how I feel like they appreciate me as a Black woman, as a
Yeah.
person with my full experiences and the full everything I bring to the table. But it's always hard when you don't have that much to bring. Like, you know, which now that I think of it, we all bring so much to the table. Even as a med student, I feel like I bring something to the table. But when you're young, you don't know that. You know,
Right.
you think, wow, these people are like taking you, and you know, you're just grateful to be there, to even have a seat in general. So now thinking back, if I work hard, I feel like I can choose what table I join in the future
Absolutely.
when I do my
Absolutely.
residency.
Another amazing point to bring to light is that, you know, you bring value to the institution, to the program, to the university, no matter where you are, to the job. So it's really important for young people to know that a lot of times as we're approaching interviews and, you know, colleges and jobs, whatever it may be, we're always sort of have that notion that, oh, I'm the lucky one to get this, but it's a two-way street. And, you know, you have to, again, believe in yourself and know your assets and know that you are definitely bringing something to the table. Did you have any interviewers that asked you questions that you felt were ever inappropriate, that were, you know, you know, even racially, did you feel uncomfortable ever? Were there ever, you know, questions that came up that seemed inappropriate, you know, and you felt like maybe you were getting and someone else who was not of your ethnicity would not be getting that question?
I It's really funny because when we talk about prejudice and inappropriate statements based on race or your, you know, ethnicity, it's always funny because I always try to frame it before I will make my statement that I don't believe anyone who did something that made me uncomfortable did it on purpose, ever.
Okay. Great.
You know, when it's malicious, I can sense when it's malicious, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think any of my interviewers were ever malicious, but the two things that jumped out was one of my interviewer the whole time only talked about my hair. It was like,
Wow.
I would say I believe it was a 45-minute interview, and she met me in the door and we had to walk into the interview room, and the whole walk there was all about my hair. And she was like, you know, did your mom teach you how to do it in this style? I had it like
Wow.
of the same French phrase, and it was just like a whole conversation, which I really appreciated. Kind of, I really didn't know how to feel, but you want to make a good impression, so you can't see anything. So you're just like, oh, yeah. I guess
Interesting.
we were talking about my hair, and it was literally the whole conversation before my interview. So that was already the atmosphere I was walking into. And
Yep.
then when I
Yep.
left, she mentioned it again. So I was like, okay,
Wow.
you know, this is, but I got in. So I was
Okay.
like, okay, I'm glad
Right.
I went through that. The other uncomfortable situation was, I would say, it's kind of interesting, actually, like women of color, we know that it's always like a double edge where you have like sexism sometimes, and then you have
Yeah.
racism, and sometimes you have an
Yeah.
intersection of that. But
Yeah.
this was my very last interview. I've been going through interviews and interviews. So I had red nail polish, and
Okay.
normally I would never have red nail polish, but it was like a last minute interview, and they were like, hop on a flight, get here, very last minute. And I was like, okay, I'm there. The next day I was there. So I didn't have time to like take off my red nail polish. And at the very end of our interview, he looks at me And he's like, your nails are very interesting. It was just so weird. And then he goes in to ask me, like, do I do it myself? It was like a whole like discussion about my nails,
Wow.
how long it takes me to do it. Like, I was just like,
Wow.
this is just simple nail polish. Like, it wasn't with anything extra. I don't know. It was just like very interesting. And then he was
Those
like,
are really
yeah.
interesting question. So, I mean, I think it really highlights that had it been a male applicant, I don't think either of those questions obviously would have been brought up. So, I mean, as a female in medicine, I know, there we have our set of challenges and hurdles. And definitely, I think that highlights that a little bit. Again, as you mentioned, not necessarily, from a place of harm or malicious, agenda, but it's just sort of, again, going into sexism and racism, you sort of you're not really aware of, what your, stance is and what kind of behavior you're engaging in. And it really takes a conscious effort to sort of correct those. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that, certainly needs to be addressed. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think students, I want to ask you a two-part question, one having to do with students, one having to do with faculty. So given, the current situation in the country and what's been happening over hundreds and hundreds of years, obviously there's, a rather awakening now. This is sort of, the time where people are being very passionate about bringing about some type of change. And given, you are now early on in your, path towards medicine, what can students do really to change the narrative? And what part can faculty play in that to really change the narrative for the students and for people that, are going through, whether it be career in medicine or college or, a workforce, what do you think people can do to help the situation?
For students, I would use my experience to answer that question. Actually, like, what can my fellow students do to help with the movement going on? A lot of my classmates have been amazing. I think the one thing with medicine is it self-selects people who are already passionate about speaking up for those whose voices have been stifled for centuries. But a lot of medicine, I'm not going to speak about the workforce. I don't know that much about the
Yeah.
workforce in
Yeah.
general. Even if when I worked in my lab, I was the only black woman in the whole company. Yeah, so
Wow.
that was, and a lot of people have that experience. But sidetracking back to med school, I would say I know a lot of people who come into med school, and medicine itself is a privileged cohort. It's a bunch of people who go into medicine already have, some people have parents, family members, they're already physicians. So, like, you get that legacy going in. Educating yourself is one of the biggest things other students could do. And then, and I think in general, we've been having this discussion about using yourself as a shield for your classmates of color. And so I can use an example. I had a
Yeah.
situation where I I was listening to a lecture, and we're in reproduction right now.
Hmm.
And one of our faculty mentioned how black girls get to menarche. So menarche is she was talking about how black girls menstruate earlier than white girls. And she just said it. And even like in general, we've had this like things being said in lectures like, oh, black people have worse lungs than white people, or when they say, black women are more likely to do this than white women, or white women are more likely to do that, with no context, right? They just
Wow.
drop this, like, how does that help me? Do I
Right.
approach my patients in the future differently based on this understanding, right? Like, okay, if black girls have menstruate earlier, does that mean anything for our reproductive health?
Right.
Nothing. There's no nuance conversation. And I've just been seeing that, like, that has been happening. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to speak up. But this is my career. This is my life. I don't want to. We all know very well that you can be labeled really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
sadly, especially in academia. Is one of
Yeah.
the, we know that this happens. Women, minorities, you can get labeled very quickly in academia,
Yep.
and get, like, as much as we all are like saying, like, oh yeah, we're here for diversity, internally we know that
Wow.
there's that
Yeah.
you can't
A
really
fine
speak
balance.
up without being, they might be like, oh yeah, she's the one that's always complaining about something. So
Right.
I'm always I don't want to be that person in the forefront, but four of my amazing classmates heard they didn't say anything wrong with it, which they don't have to, right?
Yeah.
That's why my presence, and that's why I
Right.
keep telling a lot of students of color, like, we need you in these fields, we need you in different
Right.
STEM fields, because your presence enough
Yep.
moves the conversation, right? I don't
Yep.
expect some of my colleagues who are not minorities to know that that was something to be offended by.
Yep.
I
Yep.
was offended by it. I spoke
Yep.
up to it. I gave them my point, like, hey, this is why this is not okay, because there's no nuance, and we're coming into the med field thinking that, and putting patients in hierarchies, and
Yeah.
thinking, Black people don't have a higher pain tolerance, and that's why we don't give them pain meds. Like, with no nuance
Right.
conversation, there's no studies for it. We just are
Yep.
saying this thing, and they understood, and they went to the faculty on my behalf, and they made
Love it.
my voice anonymous so I won't get any backlash. And guess what? The professor came back and apologized and spoke
Amazing.
up and gave more detail, and said, now she knows, and in the future she would not make that mistake. And then we even talked to other professors, looking back at our curriculum. We had a liver one when they said, African Americans have more alcohol related liver issues
Wow.
without any context, like
Wow.
little things
Yeah.
like that. And we start having professors redact those statements and give us more nuanced conversations. That's how I want students across the globe. Use your voice to shield your colleagues of color in
Okay,
general.
so I have to tell you, I'm so proud of you right now, and I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy that you brought this point on because what people don't understand, which we're slowly, very slowly uncovering right now in medicine, is that medicine has been taught for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, centuries, and there are things that have been taught to people, to physicians, forever as if they are the fact,
Yeah.
and in fact they are not. And so now the problem is that they were really not challenged before. And now we are starting to challenge these things and say that there needs to be corrections. So you have actually taken the first step of doing that. And by having what you also proved just now is having that allyship, your
Yeah.
friends stood up for you and went, and then having some accountability. So then educating the professors, and then the professors then acknowledging that there was something wrong in that statement because they were probably just behaving the way that they were taught. So
Exactly.
much of this is, things that can have to be undone, things that have been taught over years and years and years and centuries that, that has to be, all of this has to be undone. And you took the first steps towards that. And I want to say I'm so proud of you for doing that.
Thank you.
And again, you also mentioned another point, which you mentioned at the very beginning of our interview that I want to also highlight is that, you felt this internal struggle again in this situation specifically. You knew what was right and you wanted to voice, your opinion because it was right, but you didn't want to be judged by it either because there are then consequences. So same thing happened with your mentor in college. You didn't want to be too aggressive to be labeled as this aggressive person. And again, that's a very difficult thing that, minorities face, that women face. So, these are really, really valid points that, we have to address somehow. How do we change the culture,
Yeah.
and, those are really important things that, we need people around us to appreciate that. We need people in leadership to appreciate that because it's only going to work when there's a partnership, when everybody's in tune to it and, they're not expecting things from you to lead to that kind of behavior. They're not creating an environment where you're uncomfortable raising your opinion, raising your voice, you know. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But I want to say, Amaka, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think, you know, people have really, really benefited from hearing, you know, your point of view, your perspective. And I want to really wish you the best of luck. You know, I'm so excited to follow your journey. And I
Yeah.
know it's just the beginning of your path in medicine, and I know you're going to do great things. And, you know, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me this platform.
Of course. Well, we'll speak soon, okay? Have a good night.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.